Howdy everyone. So I now have my hinge ready to go for the lower cowling. You can see just like the other hinges, this has been drilled for the rivets, and I've also added the larger 1/4 inch holes. Actually, they're just below a 1/4 inch. I think the drill that I used for these large holes was I think it was a letter C drill, which is slightly under a 1/4 because I wanted a little bit more edge distance on either side of that, so I went a little bit smaller. But anywho, there's the hinge drilled, and it's in place with the hinge pin, of course. And I'm getting ready to fit the lower cowling in place, fully clecoed to the top cowling and clecoed up underneath. These are the plates that I was talking about. The bottom cowling comes up under here, and then it gets clecoed through these holes, and ultimately there will be nut plates up here, so it will get screwed in from underneath. Once I have the cowling in place and everything is clecoed and the bottom is clecoed, I'm going to go ahead and try to match drill through the cowling and hit these holes that are already on the hinge. So here's my plan. You can see, hopefully I get some of these reflections out of here. Using a square, I put a square on this edge of the hinge. Well, let me demonstrate that. Stand by. Here's my square. So using a square, I lay the square on the hinge, and then I make sure that it's flat against the skin of the airplane, just like you see it here. And the top edge of the ruler of the square is going through the center line of one of the rivet holes on the hinge. And then I just draw a line on the skin. So I hope that makes sense. I can't point to anything because I've got both hands tied up at the moment. So the black line, this black line here, represents the rough center line of this hole on the hinge. And I did that for each hole. So each hole has its own corresponding black reference line. And then what I had done, I had taken a ruler and I measure from the edge of the skin to each individual hole. From the edge of the skin to the hole. And what I've come up with was, you can maybe see here how I have this drawn. That's basically just saying that these holes here are roughly 5/8 inch from the edge of the skin to the hole. These holes down here, I've got this drawn to capture these holes. These holes are roughly, I just wrote down 10 to 11/16, which is actually 5/8 to 11/16. If I go in between those dimensions, that will get me close to these holes here. So these holes are going to be between 5/8 and 11/16. These holes up here will be the 5/8. So I'll bring the cowling over, I'll install it, and then using a straight edge, I'll just continue these lines onto the cowling. I'll just come right across with the ruler and extend these lines onto the cowling, and then I'll measure from the edge of the skin 5/8 for these, 5/8 to 11/16 for these, from the edge of the skin, and then I'll drill a very small hole through the cowling. And once it goes through the cowling, it shouldn't hit anything. It should go right through these holes. And then I can start stepping up each hole and then put a cleco. So that's the plan. Before I start drilling those holes, after I have the cowling in place, I want to be sure that this is still correct. Make sure that my gaps are still good. Maybe make sure my gaps are still good. The height between the top of the cowling and the spinner. Again, remember that the cowling needs to sit below the spinner to allow for engine sag over time. Make sure everything is good and aligned. Make sure everything is clecoed. And then I'm going to start drilling. So let me get started on that, and I'll talk to you guys later. Howdy, everyone. So I'm on the other side of the airplane now, but the idea is still the same. I've got the cowling in place, fully clecoed. The top is clecoed. I've got the bottom clecoed under here, like I talked about with the 3 holes, that ultimately those will be bolts. So everything is in place, and I came down and I took these reference lines that I had drawn on the skin. Using a ruler, I extended those lines now onto the cowling, like you see here. And then again, I marked in sections roughly where the hole on the hinge was located from the edge of the front skin, or the front edge of the skin. So make sure that you measure from the skin when you have the cowling in place. Don't measure from the edge of the cowling. You should have a gap in here. Measure from the skin, whatever measurement that you've come up with for each individual hole, and make a mark. You can see my little marks here. And then using a small drill bit, I think I used a number 50 drill bit. Like I said, once you drill through the cowling, it shouldn't hit anything. And then if it's off a little bit, that's okay, because when you go to the full size drill bit, you'll basically match drill it. The smaller drill makes it easier to find the hole in the hinge, and it also makes it easier when you go up to the correct size, the number 40 drill bit. If you start with a small pilot hole, when you go with the other drill bit, the number 40, you'll have a little bit more leeway as far as finding the hole and getting it drilled square. I don't recommend coming in here blind with the full size number 40 drill. Use something small first so you can at least find the hole, and then you can step up in size as you go. So that's the gist of it. Transfer the holes onto the skin, put the cowling on, transfer the lines onto the cowling, and then measure your distance, make your marks, drill a very small pilot hole, and then you can step up to the full size. So you can see I have a few in place. You can see that the clecos are in place. The other thing to make sure, it's very critical with the first 1 or 2 that you do, make sure that the spring or the hinge underneath has not sprung back out of the way. Make sure that it's up against the cowling. Drill your hole. Make sure it's up against the cowling when you put your cleco in, because you could easily push it out of the way, either with the drill bit or with the cleco. If you do that and you don't catch it and you continue to drill all your holes, you're going to think, wow, these are going in great. I'm hitting every one perfect, only to realize that the hinge had moved out of the way, and when you put it back, your holes may be screwed up. So when you do the first hole or the first couple holes, make sure your hinge is in place, and make sure that you cleco through the cowling and through the hinge, and then you can do the rest of them. So I'm going to finish these up. I'm going to go over to the other side and finish those. Next step after that is going to be just some very fine tuning with the gaps. With this now clecoed, I'm starting to notice I've got a pretty good gap here, but when I get up here, it gets kind of tight. So I gotta clean this up. Now that everything is in place and clecoed, when I trim this, it will actually move back, rather than moving it back and then adjusting the cowling to close the gap. I'm just going to move it back to open it up. So I have to open it up a little bit here. I've also noticed that there's basically no gap between the top and bottom cowling here all the way up to like this point. So I've got about a foot between the cowlings. I need to open that up a little bit. So I'm going to finish drilling these on both sides, and then I'm going to start making reference marks so I know where I need to sand it back a little bit just to get my gaps a little bit bigger. And then I'll deal with the front part here on both sides, and then I'll probably start on the oil door, the oil dipstick door thing. That will probably be the next big step. So I'll drill me some holes, and I'll talk to you guys later.